We have Samuel Glauber-Zimra. He will be speaking on cosmic love in Zion, esotericism and sexual eschatology in the Hebrew writings of Abraham Mordecai Harizman. Samuel Glauber-Zimra is a PhD candidate in the Goldstein-Goren Department of Jewish Thought at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev in Beersheba. His dissertation project is an intellectual and cultural history of the encounter with modern occult and esoteric currents in the East European Jewish cultural sphere in the period between 1900 and 1939. Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by thanking the conference organizers, Faith and Misha, for their perseverance in putting together this conference in the face of so many unforeseen challenges. We would not be gathered here today in this hybrid format without your efforts. I really want to thank you for that. I'd like to speak today about a nearly completely forgotten Jewish writer whom I believe speaks to the transformative power of esoteric ideas. In particular, my remarks relate to an entwined transformation of body and spirit, here paired with a personal, internal, messianic vision developed within the context of early 20th century Zionism. The writer I wish to speak about today is named Abraham Mordecai Harizman, who, using various pen names, wrote a series of books on marriage and sexuality in the 1930s and 40s in the British Mandate of Palestine. While several of these books appear superficially to be standard, somewhat progressive guides to marriage and sexuality, their paratexts betray a far more esoteric and transformative vision. But first, a word about Harizman himself. Abraham Mordecai Harizman was born into a Jewish Hasidic family in the town of Ushamir in present-day Ukraine in 1884. After receiving a traditional Jewish education in 1906, he immigrated to Palestine, where, inspired by Zionist ideology, he sought to work the land as a farmer. He was not, however, cut out for agricultural work and quickly devoted himself entirely to the world of Hebrew letters, publishing original poetry as well as Hebrew translations of classic European literature. His interest extended as well to contemporary esoteric literature published at that time in Germany, most notably that of the American New Thought movement, which taught that thoughts are the building blocks of reality, and the book Cosmic Consciousness, a highly influential work by the Canadian psychiatrist Richard Maurice Bucke, first published in 1901, which appeared in German translation in 1925. Harizman began that year to intermittently publish a serialized translation of Cosmic Consciousness in a Hebrew literary journal, Ktuvim, a project that was never completed. Aside from Bucke, Harizman was particularly influenced by New Thought writers such as the American Prentice Mulford and the German Karl Otto Schmidt, also known by his pen name Hilarion, as well as the German spiritual teacher Bo Yin-Ra. It was at this time, in the late 1920s, that Harizman began to articulate his eschatological vision that concerns me today. This was in effect an application of the teachings of non-Jewish esoteric writers to the religious Zionist thought articulated at that time by Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, the chief rabbi of Palestine. Kook, whose writings remain enormously influential in Israel to this day, viewed the socio-political and cultural dimensions of Zionism, their manifest secularity notwithstanding, as the external manifestations of inner spiritual and ethical processes culminating in the onset of the Messianic age. Harizman identified this impending Messianic age with the psychical revolution described by Bucke in Cosmic Consciousness. That is to say, he adopted Cook's assessment that the emergence of the externally secular Zionist movement signaled the imminent coming of the Messiah. Yet for Harizman, the idea of the Messiah did not represent an individual, but rather an internal transformation of consciousness that Harizman described at times as being akin to cosmic consciousness. Indeed, Harizman's concept of the Messiah bears a far greater resemblance to Bucke's evolutionary model of cosmic consciousness than to traditional Jewish eschatology. As for the means to achieve this messianic transformation, per Harizman, these had been provided to the Jewish people by New Thought teachers such as Mulford, Schmidt, and others. It was this vision of an impending messianic age of cosmic consciousness that drove Harizman, beginning in 1934, to publish the series of 4 Hebrew sex manuals with which we are concerned today. These were, by the way, among the first modern Hebrew sex manuals to be published. I will now briefly introduce the first 3 of these books and their esoteric components before turning to the 4th and last book, published in 1942 during the darkest days of World War II. The first of these books, titled Misterei HaNisuin, The Secrets of Marriage, was an abridged translation of the book Fit or Unfit for Marriage by the Dutch gynecologist Theodor Hendrik van de Velde. Harizman wrote in the introduction that his aim in publishing The Secrets of Marriage was to present van de Velde's rational approach to achieving marital harmony as a path to joyful life from out of the source of life itself. While there's nothing particularly esoteric about van de Velde's book, Harizman appended as an afterword a partial translation of Prentice Mulford's essay, The Law of Marriage, a New Thought Guide to Marital Bliss. Mulford, Harizman wrote, approached the topic as a clairvoyant visionary at home in the inner chambers of being. The second book in the series, titled Gever, ve-Isha, Man and Woman, appeared the following year in 1935 in Jerusalem. This was an original sex manual written by Harizman under the pen name D. Ernest Hellseher, German for serious clairvoyant. It relied heavily on van de Velde's theories, here combined with the practice of autosuggestion, as well as teachings on sexuality taken from the Jewish tradition. The reader who reached the end of the book was presented with a rather esoteric concluding essay on the subject of cosmic love. The essay, accompanied by an epigraph taken from the German neo-pagan occultist Perit Schuh, describes the state of cosmic love or cosmic consciousness as endowing its possessor with an awareness of their own immortality. While this notion was expressed explicitly by Bucke in his book Cosmic Consciousness, Harizman expands here on Bucke's understanding, adding a specifically sexual twist to cosmic consciousness, alluding to the ancient Greek story of Cupid and Psyche. He writes, this metamorphosis, i.e. cosmic consciousness, is bound up with a physiological change in the sexual plane, in which the spermatic energy is directed toward the higher centers, elevating the Jordan or elevating the Ganges, in the words of the enlightened, enabling the revelation of that higher moment of refinement and elevation of the natural eros upward to the logos, that is, to the cosmic eros. The masculine and feminine within humanity, or the eros and psyche, the two halves are melded into one harmonious creation as it was before the fall, before the sin. Cosmic consciousness, then, for Harizman, is in effect a transformation of human sexuality, in which the individual is restored to the prelapsarian state of sexual harmony enjoyed by Adam and Eve in the biblical Garden of Eden. Citing Karl Otto Schmidt, Harizman concluded that God would no longer be with us, but rather in us. Man and Woman was a bestseller, and 2 more printings appeared in 1936 and 1938. Harizman's identification of cosmic consciousness with an internal sexual revolution, i.e. cosmic love, is further accentuated in his 3rd sex guide, Sefer ha-Ahavah, the Book of Love, first published in 1940. This book, lavishly illustrated with erotic imagery, as you can see here, consists of 3 sequential parts. Night, a rather misogynistic presentation of female sexuality. Dawn, a partial translation of Der Magia der Liebe, The Magic of Love, a guide to sex magic by the German occultist Georg Lohmer. And lastly, the climactic section titled The Sun, or The Great Love, a partial translation of cosmic consciousness. In his introduction to the Book of Love, Harizman stressed that the imperative to engage in sexual education arose within the context of the Zionist movement. If diaspora Judaism had neglected the body in favor of the spirit, and the new Jew envisioned by certain Zionist ideologues focused solely on the body at the expense of the spirit, Harizman's great love, that is an eroticized cosmic consciousness, promised to restore the harmonious unity of body and spirit. It is in the 4th and last book of this series, Yotzer Adam, Madrich lezugot Tzeirim, Creator of Man, a guide for young couples, that Harizman fully articulates the the messianic impulse underlying his project. This book was penned in 1942 amidst the unprecedented bloodshed of World War II, as well as the first reports of the Nazi efforts to exterminate the Jews of Europe. For Harizman, living in Jerusalem, the political crisis was made worse by the specter of a Nazi invasion of Palestine, an existential threat to its Jewish inhabitants. These heightened tensions produced in Harizman a messianic fervor expressed in the apocalyptic tone of his book. While the body of the book is largely recycled from his earlier sex guide, Man and Woman, the introduction and conclusion to Creator of Man give insight into Harizman's messianic vision. The torrent of blood presently inundating humanity, Harizman writes in his introduction, threatens to bring mankind to a state of despair. If the evolutionary progression of humanity toward greater heights once seemed inevitable, the events of World War II appeared, and here I quote Adorno and Horkheimer, they appeared to be a reversion of enlightened civilization to barbarism. Technological advancements, Harizman noted, had seemingly only given humanity the ability to murder at the speed of a telegram. Yet Harizman remained optimistic, doggedly sticking to his messianic hopes for the future. How then could humanity emerge from this crisis? The answer, we should not be surprised to hear by this point, lay in his view of the transformative potential of human sexuality. Echoing Wilhelm Reich, Harizman argued that sexual vitality, or own in Hebrew, is the vital force underlying all of existence. Active in human beings in the form of estrogen and testosterone, the onic force, not to be confused, of course, with Bernd Reichenbach's odic force, is the underlying current inherent in all forms of human creativity, from the stone tools of primitive man to the sublime musical compositions of the classical age, as well as in the very primal forces of nature, such as the interplanetary gravitational fields or the roaring waves of the sea. As much as sexual energy is a productive creative force, however, when untended to, it can deteriorate all the way to murder, even to mass murder, on the unprecedented scale of World War II. For Harizman, such destructive sexuality is epitomized by the image of the snake, or nachash in Hebrew, that tempted Eve in the biblical Garden of Eden. Engaging in the Hebrew wordplay that is common to Jewish esoteric literature, Harizman claimed that through a regimen of daily spiritual exercises, the nachash, the snake of destructive sexual energy, could be transformed into Mashiach, the Messiah itself, understood here by Harizman as a state of rectified sexuality characterized by complete sexual liberation. This is nicely illustrated by the following frontispiece found in certain copies of the book. We see here the reunion of Adam and Eve as they crush the snake underfoot, with the rebuilt third temple in Jerusalem shining in the background. At the bottom, we see a line from one of Harizman's utopic poems that reads, "For the snake has been crushed, poison it shall no longer spread. The bitterness of death has been swallowed, eternity has been awakened." Citing Walt Whitman, Harizman describes this as a time when we have voided all but freedom and all but our own joy. The salvation of humanity from the barbarism to which it had descended thus depended on its ability to properly sublimate its misdirected sexual energies and usher in the Messianic era. Harizman, for his part, sought to bring this about through the propagation of sexual hygiene, as taught by modern sexology, in tandem with the traditions of Judaism, and thus rescue the world from certain destruction. While Harizman does not cite Bucke here, this messianic state of sexual freedom is clearly related to the state of cosmic love, or great love, that is cosmic consciousness, described in his earlier sex guides. To sum up, Harizman's sex manuals are a universal call for inner transformation in the spirit of Bucke's cosmic consciousness, situated in the Jewish messianic expectations of his particular historical moment. He believed that achieving marital harmony and sexual satisfaction would elevate both body and spirit, and that this transformation would moreover rescue humanity from its most destructive tendencies. Although largely forgotten today, Harizman is an important representative of a modern Jewish religious thinker whose writings integrate broader occult and esoteric currents within Jewish thought, most notably in his replacement of traditional Jewish eschatology with Bucke's evolutionary model of cosmic consciousness. His writings are likewise a significant contribution to the interplay of esotericism and sexuality, here manifest in his efforts to promote Hebrew sex education among the Jewish population of Palestine. I would like to conclude by sharing that Harizman's archive was recently discovered in Tel Aviv. The contents of the archive include a number of unpublished Hebrew works on subjects such as yoga, vegetarianism, and parapsychology, all cast in a messianic light, as well as, more importantly for my purposes today, the complete manuscript of a further sex guide, apparently a sequel to Creator of Man, titled The Garden of Marriage, in which Harizman further develops his notion of the Ontic force. This is what you can see here on the right. This is a very exciting discovery, and the further examination of this archive promises to deepen our understanding of this particular encounter of Judaism with broader esoteric. Thank you very much.